My name is Earl Old Person, and I'm the chief and chairman of the Blackfeet tribe of the Blackfeet Nation. And my Indian name is Charging Home. Amskapi. I also have another Indian name that I gave to myself, and it's Cold Wind. That's what the people know me by. And I've been with this leadership for over 50 years now. And I'm still taking the lead today as the chairman. And of course the chieftain is hereditary. It's a lifetime appointment. I'm glad that this information is going out in this way by hearing the real. And I'm glad that I'm part of this educational video that's going to be relayed to our young people, knowing that these are the things that were actually said, not just written by someone else.
We are the Blackfeet Indian Nation, directly related to 3 of Canada's First Nations, the Siksika, the Kainai, and the North Piikani. Collectively, we are known as the Blackfoot Confederacy, and each nation has been recognized independently by the U.S. and Canadian governments since the late 1800s. Today, the Blackfoot Confederacy has over 35,000 enrolled members. The population of the Blackfeet Indian Nation has over 16,000 enrolled members, and nearly half currently live on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation located in northwestern Montana, bordered by Glacier National Park on the west and the U.S.-Canadian border on the north. Cutbank Creek and Birch Creek make up much of the eastern and southern borders. Much of the reservation population resides in and around the town of Browning, which has been the headquarters of the Blackfeet Indian Agency since 1894. Smaller communities throughout the reservation include East Glacier, St. Mary's, Heart Butte, and Bab. The terrain of the 1.5 million acre Blackfeet Indian Reservation ranges from rolling plains in the east to the heavily forested regions that meet the peaks of the Rocky Mountains in the west. Throughout, there are rivers, lakes, buffalo jumps, cliffs, meadows, and agricultural lands. There was a time when our people were one with nature, traveling throughout the traditional lands in search of the buffalo. It was a simpler time, a time when our traditional culture thrived, a time that we shall never see again, but a time that still exists in story. Stories that have been passed down from one generation to the next since the beginning of time. In the beginning, there was only Napi. He was the creator of all Blackfoot country. There are many stories about Napi, or Old Man. According to oral legend, Old Man came from the south traveling north. Along his journey, he created many things. He made the mountains, prairies, timber, and brush first. As he passed throughout the land, he would stop here and there to make a river, and even added waterfalls to some, fixing up the world as we see it today. Then he began making all the people. animals, and birds. Then he said, "I will mark you off a piece of ground for you to use. Let no other people come into it." The land he marked off stretched from the North Saskatchewan River westward to the summit of the Rocky Mountains, south to the headwaters of the Yellowstone River, and then in an easterly direction to where the Yellowstone River meets the Missouri River. Soon he crossed the river and laid down to rest because he was tired. As he laid there on his back with his arms extended, he marked the silhouette of his body with stones. He did this many times, and many of these markings, called effigies, can be found scattered throughout all Blackfoot territory to this day. Our ancestors couldn't have imagined that the land in between these boundaries would become town sites that would one day give rise to major cities such as Calgary, Edmonton, and Regina, as well as many familiar cities throughout the state of Montana, including Great Falls, Helena, Bozeman, and Billings. It was the entire Blackfoot Confederacy that occupied and used this vast territory. The Blackfoot Confederacy was a highly complex society. Each nation spoke the same language, shared the same creation stories, customs, and moral values, all of which derive from oral legend and traditions that were given to us through our ancestors. However, each of the nations that formed the Confederacy had their own distinct leaders. Leaders made important decisions for the benefit of the whole nation. In order for one to become the band leader, he would have to possess certain qualities. Leaders developed their qualities such as knowledge, generosity, compassion, and integrity through life and formal Blackfoot society experiences. They also had to have a willingness to help and advise all the people. Within each nation of the Confederacy were recognized circles of people composed of extended families that were called bands. The amount of bands varied not only in number, but also in size depending on the nation's population at any given time. But a band of 200 to 300 people was typical. These numbers were necessary to maintain the camp, participate in ceremonies, and to provide the band with protection and security from surrounding tribes. Each band had a leader who traveled and camped with them. The band chief led them while they searched for food and resources throughout the entire territory. Each band chief sought input from the families within his band in order to make decisions that were based on the wants and the needs of the band as a whole. One of the most important decisions was where to move camp.
An ideal camp spot really depended on the time of the year, but anything with fuel, water, and any type of food source was always a very important part of their decision making for campsites.
The chief was the individual who made the decisions as to where they were going to be moving. When their resources were depleted is about the time when they needed to be moving camp, whether that be their food source, that meant their game. If they were moving camp to go hunt in different areas, that would determine when they would move. If it was time for picking certain types of plants, roots, berries, so all of those types of things to survive would determine whether the camp was going to be moving or not.
Moving camp was no easy task. The hides for our lodges were very heavy. Dogs were very important in this process. A travois was basically just 2 teepee poles tied with rawhide at one end and attached to the back of a very large, strong dog. The travois was then loaded with various necessities.
That dog would transport the owner's belongings.
Of course, all the contents that were within the lodge itself, the robes that were slept on, tools that were made from the animal for cooking, the backrests, and some of those things that they needed to take at a given time. One of the reasons that they didn't transport everything that they needed on the dogs is because they knew where they were going to be camping from season to season and from year to year. And so they cached a lot of the heavier items that they could not transport on their backs or on the travelway of the dog.
Water was one of the main reasons that a band chief advised to set up camp in that area. Not only because they used the water to drink and bathe in, but also to clean the meat of the buffalo, which were often lured in by the water resource themselves. Hunting the buffalo was done in many different ways.
Probably the most common one that people know the most about is the buffalo jumps and the pishkan that was built at the bottom of the buffalo jumps.
Prior to the horse, they would create a drive line, which is kind of like a V line, and it would go into a steep coulee or over an embankment like a cliff, and they would funnel the buffalo down into that V and drive them over the steep coulee or cliff. They would create a corral at the bottom. They would also put a sharpened pole, if you would, in to keep the buffalo, when they would hit that sharp point, it would keep them from going through that. Or otherwise, if they hit it, it would pierce through them and get stuck there, and then it could just go up and kill them. Once the animal was driven over the buffalo jump or the cliff, they would start preparing. They would skin the animal and prepare the meat, bring the hides and every aspect of the animal back to the camp, which would be used. Buffalo was kind of like their grocery store. In other words, pretty much everything that is in that animal was usable.
We ate the flank, the tenderloin, the liver, and even the kidneys. Everything that we didn't eat was made into all sorts of everyday items.
The bones were used for tools. They made scrapers to scrape the hide. Needles, they kind of filed those down to a fine point, and they would use that as a needle. Sinew off the buffalo was used as thread. Stuff in the hooves could be used for glue. You needed the hides for the clothing and the shelter, blankets, and even right down to mitts and leggings and stockings, moccasins. Every part of that animal could be used for something.
For example, buffalo tongues were essential to one of our most important ceremonies. During the summer months, the bands reunited annually to participate in the Sundance ceremonies. Afterwards, they broke apart to repeat that same cycle of life. We lived like this for centuries, up until we were reintroduced to an old friend who was much larger than he once was. He is now known as the horse. Many stories support that we first obtained horses from the Shoshone in the early 1700s. The use of horses revolutionized our lives. A horse could pack 10 times the amount of what a dog could, so they quickly replaced dogs as pack animals. Thanks to the horse, we were able to travel beyond our traditional territory much faster. We changed our hunting techniques and became more formidable in war. Before 1800, we had little contact with the white man, or as we call them, Napikwan. Our main contact with these pale strangers was through second-hand stories shared with us from surrounding tribes. We had our first direct contact with the white men when we met representatives of the Hudson Bay Company. Fur clothing was very popular in Europe, and we began trading hides for various items when the Hudson Bay Company built a trading post called Fort Edmonton near the North Saskatchewan River in 1795. One of the trade items we longed for the most was the rifle.
The Blackfeet valued the rifle because they appreciated with what the rifle brought to them as far as hunting and defending their territories.
The trade gun was the common standard weapon preferred by the Plains Indians because of its features. 10 buffalo robes or more were traded for one trade gun.
We primarily traded with the Hudson Bay Company up until the 1830s, when the Americans established a trading post along the Missouri River. Just as we did with the Hudson Bay Company, we traded hides for items such as tools, clothing, and weapons. With the help of horses and guns, the Blackfeet dominated the plains, establishing a reputation as warriors and demanding the respect of neighboring tribes, settlers, and trappers. In fact, historians often refer to the Blackfeet as the lords of the plains. However, this new way of life, like almost everything, had a downside. Up until this time, we had never tasted anything like alcohol.
So the fur traders imported alcohol to Indian country. And once they got it here, they mixed it with other ingredients to make it colorful and give it taste. Oh, what ingredients, you ask? Here's the recipe. 2 gallons of water. To that you add 1 quart of this grain alcohol. Add a twist of rank black chewing tobacco. A handful of red peppers. This is firewater. It's gotta burn a little bit. A bottle of Jamaica ginger, and then a cup of black molasses, which gives it, again, color and sweetness. Mix those ingredients together and serve.
Not only were we new to the taste, but also to the effects of alcohol consumption.
We had been boozing it up again for thousands and thousands of years. The Indians had not, had never encountered alcohol, had no resistance to it, and indeed succumbed to it.
The faster and wider movement throughout the land introduced us to a broader territory, and we met many different people throughout these travels, and with that came disease. The Blackfeet people suffered great losses of life from diseases like smallpox.
They had never experienced that type of disease before, so it was a very detrimental disease that spread rapidly, weakened people, and that was the effects it had, and unfortunately a lot of people died from it.
We had been familiar and had developed resistance to smallpox over thousands of years. They had never encountered smallpox. To give you an example of how devastating smallpox was, between 1835 and 1837, half of the Blackfeet people died of smallpox. 1/2, one of the most formidable tribes in the West.
It's only when our numbers dwindled to disease that more encroachment came.
Disease, ongoing fighting, and the devastating influence of firewater had already taken a toll on our people, and things got even worse when the U.S. government introduced the Indian Removal Act of 1830. This policy ordered all Indian tribes east of the Mississippi River to move westward, right toward our traditional lands. So a lot of crowding began to take place.
Anytime that you start encroaching on any human, any animal, or anything that is used to a certain environment, there's going to be some reaction there.
Over the years, we had many quarrels with those who invaded our territory and threatened our way of life. Many of the men we fought with would go on to become American legends and have many places named after them, like Meriwether Lewis, John Coulter, Jim Bridger, Kit Carson, and Liver-Eating Johnson. Now, one thing that has to be addressed is why all this was happening. And the answer is very simple: land. Beginning in 1851, several land cessions reduced the size of Blackfoot territory. These land cessions began with the 1851 Fort Laramie Treaty, where the tribes surrounding Blackfeet territory met with the U.S. government and established a common hunting ground in the southern end of Blackfoot territory. This common hunting ground set exterior borders for the Blackfoot people. The Blackfeet people were not present at this council. After Congress ratified the Fort Laramie Treaty, appropriations were made to build a railroad from St. Paul, Minnesota to the Pacific coast. Isaac I. Stevens was commissioned to complete an exploration and railroad survey which was to pass through the heart of Blackfoot territory. Stevens needed an interpreter who had already established friendly relations with the Blackfeet. He found this at Fort Benton. Alexander Culbertson was in charge of trade there and married to a Blackfoot woman named Natawista. This relationship set the stage for the government's intent to negotiate what is now known as the Lame Bull Treaty. On October 17, 1855, the Blackfoot Confederacy signed their first and only treaty that would ever be ratified by the United States Congress. Signers of this treaty included Mountain Chief, Lowhorn, Little Grayhead, Big Snake, the Skunk, the Badhead, and Lame Bull himself. The treaty was an agreement to share the common hunting ground previously established at Fort Laramie for exactly 99 years. This land was just below an imaginary line drawn eastward from present-day Rogers Pass to the nearest point of the Musselshell River. In exchange for this land, the Confederacy was to receive annuities for 10 years and the first designated Blackfoot agency, which was established at Fort Benton. The discovery of gold and other precious metals in Blackfeet country increased intrusions upon our land and resources. More wild game was being consumed by the homesteaders who began to settle in the land south of the Missouri and Teton rivers. In 1865 and 1868, the U.S. government made treaty with the Blackfoot Confederacy once again.
The 1865 and the 1868 agreements or treaties were never ratified by the United States government. In other words, it was never approved. Although the Blackfoot were led to believe that it had been approved.
The Blackfeet were led to believe the payment for land through annuities would be forthcoming. But we still have not been paid for these lands to this day. Government officials claimed that the treaty was designed to stop warfare. They couldn't have been more wrong. On a peaceful trip to a ranch near Birdtail, 4 unarmed and outnumbered Blackfeet were murdered by neighboring prospectors. This was unknowingly witnessed by a small band of Blackfeet who immediately fled to the tribe with word. This did not sit well with our people. In addition to this betrayal, the stipulations of the peace treaties were utterly disregarded by the U.S. So many of the Blackfeet accepted the alternative of war. Our retaliations began by burning the agency buildings on Sun River. The government responded by establishing Fort Shaw on the Sun River to protect the settlements. Here and there throughout the land, we struck the white man. Many were found slain, and others just disappeared, never to be heard from again. However, one of these murders is quite infamous. In August of 1869, near the Prickly Pear Creek, a pioneer cattleman named Malcolm Clark, was shot near his home by a revengeful owl child. He was buried on a hill not far from his stage stop. The death of Malcolm Clark outraged General Sheridan and triggered him to order Major Baker to strike them and strike them hard. Them being us. The troops marched from Fort Shaw. In the early morning hours of January 23, 1870, General Baker's troops attacked Heavy Runners camp that frigid winter morning. Heavy Runners band, known to be peaceful, had nothing to do with the death of Malcolm Clark. Yet, the Bear River Massacre on the Marias River resulted in the deaths of over 200 of our people, primarily women, children, and elderly men, most of whom were already ill with smallpox. The survivors said that the men were out hunting in the Sweetgrass Hills at the time of the attack. The cavalry suffered only one loss, one. Warfare dwindled after the Bear River Massacre. After March 3, 1871, Indian tribes were no longer treated as foreign powers, but were considered wards of the government.
So that meant there was no more sitting down and negotiating with tribes. Next thing that happened was they call it executive orders. Those executive orders, with the stroke of a pen, lots of tribes lost lots of land, thousands of acres of land, and that happened to the Blackfeet.
In 1873, President Grant moved the southern boundary of Blackfeet territory north to the Missouri and Sun Rivers. Land to the south was officially open to settlement for the first time. In 1874, President Grant issued our second executive order, moving our southwestern boundary north from the Sun River to Birch Creek and the Marias River, leaving us with this boundary. The land that was taken from us was some of our prime hunting ground. Our people complained bitterly that we had no right of protest in this matter, and a year later, President Grant yielded to congressional opinion. He set aside a new common hunting ground that we were to share with the River Crow. In 1880, President Hayes took back the land of the 1875 common hunting ground. We continued to hunt what was left of the buffalo, but they were quickly becoming extinct, for they were needlessly being slaughtered and left to rot by those who knew our way of life would be doomed without them. This resulted in the starvation of the Blackfeet in the winter of 1883 and 84. By 1887, we were so hopeless that we made an agreement to sell land to the U.S. 17,500,000 acres were ceded to the U.S. through this agreement alone. The remainder of the land was divided into 3 reservations: the Fort Peck Reservation, Fort Belknap Reservation, and the Blackfeet Reservation. Our people, of course, were assigned to the Blackfeet Reservation. We named this agreement after one of our people's most sacred areas that we gave up in this agreement, the Sweetgrass Hills. Missions were formed in order to house and educate Indian children. The Holy Family Mission was founded on the Blackfeet Reservation in 1890. Blackfeet children were forced to participate in a tightly structured program of academia and personal reprogramming by the Catholic priests and nuns that watched over them. As a result of mission upbringings and reservation living, we nearly lost our culture and our language. This is all that is left of the Holy Family Mission today. In 1895, we agreed to lease a strip of land on the western boundary for 99 years, leaving us with the boundaries of our current reservation. This land contained some of our most sacred mountains and our richest resources. This strip of land became known as Glacier National Park. Soon after the park was opened, stories of the beauties within attracted wealthy tourists from afar.
This year, we'll have a real vacation in one of our great national parks. We're going to northwestern Montana, to the finest mountain country in America. Convenient camps make it unnecessary to carry food or camping equipment. Horseback and foot trails penetrate almost all sections of the park. You can go as you please. There's an Indian encampment nearby. We're on the edge of the great Blackfeet reservation. And it's like turning back the pages of history to watch them sing and dance. The Blackfeet were once the terror of the North, but the tide of civilization has swept over them. With the vivid picture of these American Aborigines in our minds, we go across this attractive bridge. We're on the way to the chalets near the foot of Two Medicine Lake. Majestic forest-covered peaks rise on every side, separated by deep glaciated valleys. The water comes tumbling down from the blue mountain lake above and falls to the stream below. There's good trout fishing here, brook and rainbow, and in the larger lakes, a Mackinaw or Dolly Varden weighing as much as 40 pounds. Here's an oddity. The wind's blowing the water backward, and it makes a beautiful sight against the sky. The sun smiles down on peaceful lakes and towering mountains. Wild life abounds. There's a ground squirrel. Have you ever seen one? Friendly little fellow. You can walk right up to him. He's shy, but he's hungry too. He's always hungry. The waitresses at Glacier Park Hotel dress in Swedish costumes. They're watching this launch cutting its way through the clear blue water, bringing visitors from one of the trails across the lake. Forests are dense and the ground is carpeted with flowers. Let's take one of these trails. Food and supplies are loaded, and we cross this small bridge. We've heard that near Swift Current Falls, there are some nesting water ouzels. There's one, see him? Here's the place to study wildlife. There are so many things to do in any glacier region. You can learn the secrets of nature, climb a mountain, go swimming, fish.
In order to ensure the success of the park, many of our people were taken to places like New York and Washington, D.C. to advertise the park and also unofficially let the public know that our people were friendly. They must have felt very different riding on the train like the white man for the first time. Perhaps even privileged, considering that they weren't allowed to leave the boundaries of the reservation starting in the late 1800s. They had never seen such marvels and must have felt very small standing next to the skyscrapers that they couldn't have imagined existed. At the turn of the 20th century, the Blackfeet people were speaking both Blackfeet and English, dressing in buckskin, calico, trade wool, eating domestic beef, fry bread, living in teepees and log homes, dividing the reservation into land allotments, bargaining their land and sacredness for store items. Napi's teachings and land resources for the Blackfeet had dwindled. It was now time for the Blackfeet to rethink the centuries of knowledge and way of life, to adapt to the new life of Blackfeet and American culture. The rubbing together of these two worlds would create the modern-day Blackfeet. In 1924, the Blackfeet people became citizens of the United States with voting privilege. The Indian Citizenship Act of 1924 proclaimed, "Be it enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America in Congress assembled, that all non-citizen Indians born within the territorial limits of the United States be, and they are hereby declared to be citizens of the United States, provided that the granting of such citizenship shall not in any manner impair or otherwise affect the right of any Indian to tribal or other property." The 1887-1934 allotment and assimilation federal Indian policy era led abruptly to the Indian reorganization era of 1934 to 1953. The abrupt change was led by two significant events: the 1928 Merriam Report and the Great Depression of the 1930s. In 1935, the Indian Reorganization Act, also known as the Wheeler-Howard Act, came to the Blackfeet Indian tribe and established three things. 1. The tribe as a political entity. 2. As a business corporation where all tribal members shared profits. And 3. The Tribal Council. The tribal membership consisted of all persons of Indian blood whose names appear on the official census roll of the tribe as of January 1st, 1935. All children born prior to the adoption of this amendment to any blood member of the Blackfeet tribe, maintaining a legal residence within the territory of the reservation at the time of such birth. The 1953 to 1968 termination era was experienced by the Blackfeet tribe. However, our reservation was not eliminated, and the tribal government maintained jurisdiction over our land and our people. In 1962, the Blackfeet Constitution required 1/4 or more Blackfeet blood quantum for enrolled membership in the tribe. Those persons not meeting blood quantum requirements became known as descendants. Beginning in 1968 and continuing to present day, the federal policy of tribal self-determination was enacted to affirm the rights of the first Americans to remain Indians while exercising their right as Americans. Despite these policies, there are still many misunderstandings of whom our people are. These misunderstandings stem from a federal level.
Let me tell you just a little something about the American Indian in our land. We have provided millions of acres of land for what are called the preservations, or the reservations, I should say. They, from the beginning, announced that they wanted to maintain their way of life as they had always lived there in the desert and the plains and so forth. Maybe we made a mistake. Maybe we should not have humored them in that wanting to stay in that kind of primitive lifestyle. Maybe we should have said, no, come join us, be citizens, along with the rest of us.
As you have learned today, we became citizens back in 1924. For those who may share similar misunderstandings of who we are as a people, We hope that the knowledge that we have shared will help you to recognize the distinct and unique cultural heritage of the Blackfeet people and other tribes throughout America.